Plasma storms look dramatic from a distance, beautiful even, like neon oceans rolling through the sky. But when one is tearing your convoy into metallic confetti, the charm fades quickly. One moment I was sitting beside Lyra, trying very hard not to think about how her long ears twitched every time I spoke, and the next I was upside down inside a transport shell that had no business being upside down. Lyra had vanished in the flash, carried who knows where by her squad, while I remained behind with all the dignity of a man hugging a sparking control console. By the time I crawled out, the battlefield had become an unrecognizable maze. Smoke drifted in columns that shimmered purple from the storm's leftover charge, and the air tasted like someone mixed metal with disappointment. My comms buzzed, fizzled, and then gave up entirely, rather rude, considering I was depending on them to keep me alive. I heard distant shouting from Lyra's unit, but it was swallowed by the lightning-like crack of plasma bolts slicing apart the horizon. I yelled her name, mostly out of optimism, partly because I wanted her to feel a little guilty if I died. The relay station loomed ahead, humming like an ancient refrigerator left on for too many millennia. It was supposed to be defended by a full squad. Instead, it had one very confused human who barely knew how to hold a plasma rifle without violating at least 3 safety warnings. I dashed into its central platform, slipping on a coolant spill that may or may not have been my fault, and slammed the door panel shut behind me. The barrier groaned, flickered, and settled with the energetic enthusiasm of an elderly door that resented being used. I checked the tactical screen. It displayed a cheerful blinking dot representing me and about 40 unfriendly signatures closing in. I tried tapping the screen, hoping it was an error. It helpfully zoomed in and revealed that the drones were even closer than I thought. I muttered something about unfair working conditions and searched the station for anything resembling a miracle. What I found instead was a half-broken turret, a power core that hummed like a growling stomach, and a data pad covered in alien handwriting that translated roughly to, "Do not touch this under any circumstances." Naturally, I touched it. The pad sparked to life, throwing a holographic projection into the air, a guide drone with an overly cheerful voice. It began explaining proper station defense protocols in a tone that suggested I was a child who shouldn't be trusted near sharp objects. I argued with it out of principle. The drone ignored me and continued listing the many ways the station could explode if mishandled. I asked if it had tips on how not to explode. It answered, ideally, maintain the station's structural integrity, which was about as helpful as telling someone falling off a cliff to try not to hit the ground. The first wave of drones arrived before I could file a complaint with the universe. They swarmed out of the storm's haze, glowing red like particularly angry ornaments, and I fired the turret with the wild hope that the thing still worked. To my surprise and deep relief, it spat a stream of plasma bursts that cut through the drones in a blazing arc. I might have cheered out loud. Then the turret coughed, sputtered, and went silent. I smacked it on the side, which fixed nothing but made me feel better. With the main weapon down, I resorted to improvisation. I rerouted the station's ventilation system to blast superheated air into the entrance corridor. I overloaded the shield generator so it flickered like a strobe light, confusing the drones into thinking it was a trap. I even threw a metal panel at one of them when it got too close. The panel bounced off harmlessly, but the drone paused, as if personally offended, which bought me enough time to blast it with a hand cannon I absolutely did not know how to aim properly. Between shots, I muttered complaints to the empty air, about the station, about the storm, about Lyra leaving me behind. Sometimes I imagined her scolding me, her long ears stiff in irritation, telling me I was handling every piece of equipment incorrectly. Somehow imagining that made me braver, or stupider. Hard to tell in the moment. Hours or maybe minutes, time was a liar that day, passed in a blur of sparks and yelling and questionable tactical decisions. When the final drone collapsed in a heap of sizzling wires, I slumped against the console, panting like I'd sprinted up a mountain made entirely of bad life choices. The storm had quieted, leaving only the low hum of the relay station and the faint echo of distant engines. I didn't know where Lyra was. I didn't know if reinforcements were coming. I only knew that I was somehow still alive, the station was still standing, and the battlefield was finally silent. I lifted my rifle, shook it as if thanking an unreliable friend, and whispered, "Please don't explode now." The rifle made a sad buzzing sound, which, in fairness, was exactly how I felt too. Lyra sprinted through the storm-torn valley with the kind of determination usually reserved for beings who have just realized they left something extremely important behind. In her case, that something happened to be me, which explained why her ears were pinned flat in a way that usually meant someone was about to get yelled at. Her squad trailed behind her, shouting questions she ignored, because answering them would require admitting she'd abandoned a human at a relay station that really shouldn't be defended by just one person, especially not a person who once burned instant noodles by accident. She vaulted over a shattered skimmer, landed hard, and tapped her comm. Static hissed back. She tried again. Nothing. She muttered something in her language that I was 90% sure translated to a very elegant curse. Her lieutenant caught up, panting, asking if they were charging into danger or just running recreationally for fun. Lyra snapped that I was alone at the relay. The lieutenant blinked at her like she'd announced she'd left a houseplant in charge of the battlefield. The squad changed direction immediately. While they raced toward me, I was inside the station discovering several new ways the universe could try to kill me. The power core had begun making a noise I could only describe as ominous whale song, and the console started displaying warning symbols that looked like tiny aliens screaming for help. I smacked the panel, purely instinct, and the symbols rearranged themselves into different symbols that also looked like screaming aliens. I decided this was an improvement. Then the radar pinged again. More drones. But these weren't the small, annoying ones. I recognized the signatures from Lyra's briefings. Heavy assault models. The kind built to punch holes in fortresses, not to chase down a single underqualified human. I took a deep breath, mostly to pretend I had control over the situation, and prepped the only trick I had left. Rerouting the entire station's emergency heat vents to turn the outer walkway into what I hoped would be a mildly insulting inferno. When the drones descended, they looked confused. The walkway erupted in a wave of blistering heat so intense even I stepped back, and I was standing safely behind a blast door. The drones staggered, recalibrated, and one of them let out a mechanical chirp that, to my stressed brain, sounded exactly like it was calling me rude. I yelled back something about filing complaints with management. They opened fire. The station rattled like it was reconsidering its life choices. I dove behind a pillar as a plasma bolt tore a glowing line across the floor. The heat vents sputtered. The system was angry, overloaded, or maybe just tired of my nonsense, and the temperature dropped abruptly. The drones surged forward again. I grabbed the half-functional turret, propped it on its side, and slammed a fist into its casing. It whined, clicked, and blasted a beam so bright I thought I'd accidentally opened a portal to the sun. A drone exploded in a rain of molten fragments. I whooped triumphantly, right before the turret's battery lit on fire. I threw it, because that seemed like the correct response when something ignited in your hands. It crashed into another drone, which somehow counted as a tactical victory even though gravity did most of the work. The remaining drone lunged forward, raised its cannon, and I braced for the kind of impact that would absolutely ruin my week. It never came. A shockwave rolled over the station like thunder given physical form. The drone froze. Then its chassis crumpled inward as if something had punched the air itself. Lyra's voice crackled through the comm, barely working, but miraculously alive. calling my name with the desperate tone of someone who had not emotionally prepared for the possibility of finding me in pieces. I coughed, stood slowly, and told her the station was mostly intact, which was a generous interpretation of the situation. The floor smoked, the walls sparkled with burnt circuitry, and something in the corner was still on fire even though I didn't remember anything being flammable there in the first place. She shouted that she was minutes away. I muttered that I'd try to avoid exploding before she got here. The comm sparked loudly, as if offended by my sarcasm, and then went silent again. Outside, the storm began to fade, revealing distant lights cutting through the clouds, multiple ships approaching in formation. Too large to be drones, too coordinated to be scavengers. Reinforcements. Maybe, hopefully friendly. Preferably friendly. Ideally friendly and in a generous mood. I slumped against the wall, wiped soot off my face, and decided that if anyone asked how I defended the station, I would absolutely lie in a way that made me sound cool and strategic instead of panicked and improvisational. The ground trembled softly as the incoming fleet drew nearer. I tightened my grip on the rifle, already preparing for the possibility that the next visitor would either save me, yell at me, or both. Because if I knew Lyra, she had a very long list of things to say. And unfortunately, I had already run out of places to hide. The first thing I noticed when the fleet descended was the sound, deep, resonant, like the sky clearing its throat before making a dramatic entrance. The second thing I noticed was that I was covered in soot, leaning against a wall that was no longer entirely attached to the building, and holding a rifle that beeped sadly every few seconds as if mourning its own existence. Not ideal conditions for meeting royalty, especially alien royalty. Especially alien royalty who happened to be Lyra's mother. The ships touched down with synchronized precision, kicking up dust and leftover sparks. Their hulls gleamed in the fading stormlight, marked with the insignia of the Queen's elite guard. I stood straighter, mostly because if I didn't, gravity would have made the choice for me. The relay station doors hissed open, and a column of armored warriors marched inside, their steps heavy enough to make the floor reconsider staying solid. They spread out around me, weapons angled down but ready, examining the wreckage with expressions I couldn't read through their helmets. One of them pointed at the burning turret remains. Another gestured at the melted floor. A third tapped the wall and it crumbled slightly, which felt rude even if accurate. Then the Queen stepped forward. Her presence filled the room instantly. Not with intimidation exactly, but with an energy that made everything feel sharper, more significant. Her armor shimmered like starlight condensed into metal, and her long ears, just like Lyra's, tilted with a curious grace as she surveyed the chaos. I tried to salute. My arm didn't fully cooperate. The gesture ended up looking more like I was trying to stretch after a long nap. She studied me for several seconds, gaze flicking from the ruined station to the pile of destroyed drones to the scorch mark suspiciously shaped like my silhouette. Then to my horror she smiled. Not a warm smile, more like a fascinated "how did this not die" kind of smile. Before she could speak, Lyra burst through the doorway, out of breath, armor scuffed, ears pinned back in a way that told me a lecture was incoming. She shoved past two guards who stepped aside with the weary resignation of people used to this behavior and marched straight up to me. I braced. "You are," she said, poking my chest, "the most infuriating, reckless, unpredictable, and unbelievably lucky human I have ever met." I considered defending myself, but she looked like she might stab the air just to emphasize her point, so I wisely remained silent. Then she exhaled, shoulders dropping, and the anger melted into something softer, though her ears stayed tilted in that way that suggested she was pretending not to be relieved. The Queen approached us, her guards parting like respectful curtains. She looked between us with a knowing lift of her brow. "Your human appears durable," she said, "and surprisingly effective." "I wasn't trying to be effective," I blurted. "Mostly I was trying not to explode." Her eyes sparkled with amusement. And yet, you succeeded at both defending this station and not exploding, a notable achievement for your species. I decided that was probably a compliment. She walked around the site, examining the wreckage more closely, and the warriors followed her with quiet reverence. She saw the melted conduits I'd overloaded, the still smoking vents, the turret with its battery cratered in the wall. She touched the console, still flickering, and nodded as though assessing the work of an eccentric artist. "This stands," she said finally, "as proof that courage does not always come from strength. Sometimes it comes from desperation mixed with questionable decision-making." "That sounds like me," I admitted. Lyra snorted. "That is you." The Queen turned to me again, expression now more serious. "Your actions changed the course of this battle. Had the station fallen, the enemy would have breached our flank. Many lives would have been lost. You fought alone when no one expected you to stand at all." I swallowed, suddenly unsure what to do with my hands. I didn't really think about it. I just knew Lyra was out there, and the drones wouldn't exactly wait politely for me to panic. Lyra's ears flicked upward in surprise and her expression softened again, but this time she didn't hide it. The Queen observed us both, the amusement returning. "It seems my daughter's concern was not misplaced." Lyra made a strangled sound. "Mother." "Stop implying things." "I implied nothing," the Queen replied, which was technically true and emotionally false. She turned back to her fleet. "Prepare repairs for the station. And bring this human a medical scan before he collapses on my floor." "I'm fine," I protested. I immediately tripped over a piece of drone debris. Lyra caught my arm with a sigh that was half exasperation, half something far gentler. "You've changed," she murmured. "Last cycle you'd have run the other direction from all this." I shrugged, feeling strangely proud. Maybe I got tired of running. "Or maybe," she said, nudging me lightly, "you finally figured out you could do more." For once I didn't joke back. Maybe. Outside, the storm fully cleared, revealing a sky washed clean and bright. The fleet's